years ago, I couldn't walk up a flight of stairs without getting winded. Now, here I am, about to embark on a solo hike through the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. I had been overweight my whole life, and the older I got, the more miserable and depressed I was becoming. My doctors kept trying to warn me that my body wasn't going to be able to sustain this for much longer, which ended up making me feel more miserable and depressed. And I started waking up in the middle of the night with these overwhelming feeling of impending doom, like I was gonna die. And on my 39th birthday, something in my brain just snapped. I couldn't do this anymore. I had wasted half my life. Well, probably more than half my life, because I was gonna die pretty young if I didn't get my shit together. So I did it, and I managed to lose 100 pounds. And look, don't expect me to be able to give you some kind of magic secret. I don't even think I know what happened or what finally changed for me to be able to do it this time. Because at this point, I had tried everything and nothing worked. But for whatever reason, this just clicked. And it wasn't easy, that was for sure. I was about as far from an active person as you could possibly be. There were a lot of ups and downs, but the biggest challenge was finding some kind of exercise that I actually enjoyed and that was fun. But somewhere along the way, I did. I started hiking and I immediately fell in love with it. It was something about the peace and calm or the way I felt on the trails. And I loved the challenge of the terrain and just the way that hiking made me feel. I felt strong and capable for the first time in my life. So when it came time to celebrate my 2-year fitiversary, I wanted to celebrate with something extreme. Something that the old me would never have been able to do. Actually, something the old me would never even have considered doing. And I knew exactly what that was gonna be. I had a work trip to Chattanooga, Tennessee that was about a month away. And I decided when we were done with all the work stuff for that week, I was gonna rent a car and then drive down to the Great Smoky Mountain National Park to do this multi-day solo hike. This was gonna be epic because up until this point, I had never done anything more than a day hike. I planned everything meticulously. I got new hiking boots, top of the line gear, and enough supplies to last me for 3 days. And I told my family and friends my plan, my exact route, and when to expect me home. Look, I watch a lot of TV, and I know you're never supposed to go into the woods unless you let people know where you're going, and when to call the authorities if you don't return. So if anything, I was being overcautious. I felt ready, I felt prepared, and I felt confident. So we arrived in Chattanooga on Monday, and then all the work conference stuff ended by Wednesday. So my plan was to rent a car and then drive down to this small town that was located just outside the entrance of the park. And I was gonna stay the night to make sure that I was well rested and that I had enough supplies and was able to pick anything up that I might have forgot. And then I would hike Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then fly back home on Sunday. Easy peasy. Everything was lining up beautifully. So after a couple hours of driving, I made it to the town and then to the hotel I planned on staying at. It was perfect. It was cheap and it was just a short drive to the entrance of the park. And then next to the hotel was this cute little diner. So I decided to stop in and get something to eat and then check through my supplies to make sure that I had everything I needed before I headed out in the morning. And as I was checking through my supplies, I kind of noticed this older man looking at me, kind of like watching what I was doing. It was a little creepy. It's not like he was trying to hide it at all. And then we were at a point where I'm looking at him, he's looking at me, and then he finally says, "Hiking the Smokies, huh?" And I was just like, "Yeah, you got any words of wisdom for me?" So then he comes over to my table and he starts like eyeing my gear. And then he says, "Well, looks like you've got everything you need for the trip." And then he introduced himself as Alan, and Alan turned out to be a pretty cool guy. We talked for like 25 minutes about the Smokies. He was a retired park ranger. I showed him my route. He was really familiar with it. In fact, he had a lot of great suggestions for things I should stop and see along the way. And as we were chatting, I told him my story and how I ended up here. And he told me about his family and his time as a park ranger in the Smokies. It was a really nice chat. When I got up to leave, Alan, who had been very fun and sweet up until this point, suddenly got this look of concern on his face. And then he leans in and gestures for me to come closer. And he says really quietly, "You know the rules, right?" I was a little caught off guard. I mean, I had just talked to the man for about 25 minutes, all about my history, about my hiking experience, and yeah, I knew the rules. So I just kind of laughed and patted my back and said, "Yeah, leave no trace, stick to the trails. I've got it covered. I know how to stay safe in the woods." And this is where it got really weird. Alan got really serious and he says, "No, not those rules, the real rules. The ones that keep you safe in these woods." There was something about his tone that gave me pause. Like, what do you mean, the real rules? He leaned in closer, and his voice dropped really low, and he whispers to me, "Listen careful. This is important. Don't look up if the birds go quiet. You see something? No, you didn't. If you hear something? No, you didn't. Don't whistle after dark. And if you hear a whistle, whatever you do, do not whistle back. And I just kind of nodded. Okay, Alan. I mean, I was unnerved, but I really wasn't trying to show it. I knew there was a lot of folklore and history in this area, so I kind of just chalked it up to local superstition and urban legends. I mean, Alan was an old man, probably a grandfather, probably a jokester, just trying to razzle me up, like, here's this tourist coming here to hike in our park. I mean, this is Appalachia. I'm not dumb. I've seen the TikToks and all the other social media posts, and apparently so had Ellen. But that stuff's not real. At least that's what I thought. I had brushed it off and actually completely forgot about it by the next morning. I was just so excited to get going on this adventure. And the first day and a half were glorious. The autumn colors were in full bloom, the air was crisp and invigorating, and I felt strong and alive. And it was hard. It was so much harder than I thought it was going to be. Hiking these trails was physically demanding, but the isolation was actually the part that was harder than I thought. I was having fun, but I noticed I was starting to feel lonely from time to time. It was crazy how alive the forest was. I mean, birds were chirping, little animals were scurrying about, big animals were trotting through the trees, and the leaves and the branches just swayed almost rhythmically as the wind blew through them. It was pretty cool. And it was actually kind of creepy how some of the birds actually sounded like people talking, but like from a distance. Or maybe it was people talking. I don't know. I didn't see anybody else on the trail. I think I had only really passed a couple of people along the way at the beginning. At one point when I was hiking on the trail, getting close to the spot where I was going to camp for the second night, I noticed that there was a deer kind of flanking me through the trees, just like side by side with me as I'm walking. And when I would walk, he would walk. And when I would stop, he would stop. It was kind of like we were in sync. And I'm not an animal expert, but I'm pretty sure deer are skittish. So I just figured that it was really kind of freaked out by me and was trying to keep an eye on me to make sure I wasn't going to harm it in any way. But it just stayed next to me. And at one point, I kind of just stopped and turned to face it. It was about 15 or 20 yards away from me. And we just sat there and stared at each other for a very awkward amount of time. And I don't know if it was my newfound hippie essence or maybe the fact that I hadn't talked to anybody in a day and a half. But I figured I would just let it know that I wasn't going to hurt it and it could just keep on trucking. Have a good life, Bambi. So I said to it out loud, hey, don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to come anywhere near you. I won't bother you at all. And in return, if you could stop following me, that would be great. Like, you're kind of creeping me out. And as soon as I said it, the whole mood changed. The deer didn't move, and I had lost channeling my inner Snow White. Like, I was no longer comfortable with this. And I actually started to feel like I wasn't talking to the deer, but like pleading or negotiating with it. Like, hey, get going. What are you doing? Aren't you supposed to be scared of me? And it just stood there and looked at me, almost like it was taking in what I was saying and considering it. But needless to say, it was not afraid of me at all. But I decided to just turn around and keep on walking. It was getting close to dark, and I wasn't about to be caught out here on the trail talking to a deer. And I'm pretty sure I've seen a YouTube video or something about a guy getting his ass handed to him by a deer, so I wasn't going to mess with it anymore. I didn't want to piss it off any more than I felt like I already had. So I hiked for about 30 more minutes before I finally ended up at the spot that I had chosen to camp at on the second night. And it wasn't anything special, just a small little campsite about 10 yards off the trail. Everything was well marked, and it was kind of this open area that was meant for camping, just nestled back in the trees. Just an area of flat dirt to set up the tent and get comfy for the night. And as I was setting up my camp and laying out my stuff, I couldn't help but feel this proud sense of accomplishment for how far I had come, both on the trail and in life. And I had just finished setting up my tent and taking in all of the nature sounds around me when I started to hear this bird song that I hadn't heard up until this point. It was pretty far off in the distance, but it just seemed off. It didn't seem right. And as I'm straining to hear it, I realize it's not a bird, it's a whistle. It's someone whistling. But I hadn't passed any other hikers. There's nobody on the trail. Like, I hope this isn't a person that's lost, that's like trying to get somebody's attention. And I know that people get lost and go missing here all the time. I mean, this is a really easy place to get lost in. So I quick shot a whistle back in the direction I thought it was coming from, and then I just waited to hear if they whistled back. And I was looking off in the direction I thought it was coming from, but it was getting dark. It was so hard to see through the trees. But after just about a second, I did spot somebody. Somebody was coming towards me through the trees. Hey, somebody was in trouble, and I saved the day. I can add that to my list of accomplishments. And I was starting to play scenarios in my mind, like how I was going to get them some food, maybe some water. Should we call authorities? Can I get them some help? Then I noticed they weren't getting any closer. In fact, they had just kind of stopped. And I was straining to get a better look, and I could see that this person it was actually a really tall person, was just standing, like almost hiding behind a tree, like where they're behind the tree and like their upper half is sticking out looking at you. Like, what the hell were they doing? Maybe I could see them, but they couldn't see me. And I was just about to whistle back when Alan's words came rushing back to me and I instantly froze. Don't whistle after dark. And if you hear whistling, whatever you do, don't whistle back. I was holding my breath. I didn't know what to do. I mean, come on, this is just a superstition. This is clearly a human. I'm looking at a human, right? Right? And then the whistle came again, and it snapped me out of my daze. I took a deep breath. It was closer this time, and the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. The whistle was wrong. There was something not right about it. It didn't sound human, and that's when I realized everything had went silent. The leaves stopped rustling, the wind stopped blowing, the birds stopped chirping. Don't look up if the birds go silent. I fought every instinct in my body and kept my eyes on the ground. What was out there? I felt this like innate sense of fear washing over me, like this sixth sense that was trying to warn me that whatever was out there standing behind that tree, it was not human. It may look human, but it's not. And there it was, like an old familiar friend I hadn't seen in years. That all too familiar feeling of impending doom just covered me like an icy blanket. I knew this feeling all too well. I was gonna die. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure that whatever was out there could hear it. And I couldn't take it anymore. I slowly lifted my eyes up from the ground and looked out into the direction this thing was in. But there was nothing there. It was getting dark now, and the light from the campfire was making it really difficult to see anything out in the darkness. I slowly backed up and got as close to the fire as I safely could. It was the only thing giving me any sort of feeling of calm at this point. And I knew that fires could keep predators away, but this wasn't an animal. At least I didn't think it was. After about a half an hour, nothing else had happened. No whistling, no movement, and still no noise other than the crackling of the campfire. I was starting to feel like I was overreacting. It's just urban legends. None of this stuff is real. I've been in the woods many times and nothing has happened. I finally started to relax a little bit, and I sat down in my camping chair facing the fire with my back to the woods. That was a huge mistake. And almost immediately I heard a loud thud on the ground next to me, and whatever it was so heavy I could actually feel it shake the ground. But I looked over and there's nothing there. I quickly opened my tent and grabbed the flashlight and started scanning the tree line, but I didn't see anything. Good God, am I so paranoid over an old man trying to scare a tourist with some stupid rules that I'm gonna give myself a heart attack? I sat back down, took a deep breath, and sunk back into my chair. And just as I did that, I happened to look over to my right, and I saw something on the ground. No, not on the ground, but in the ground. So I shined my flashlight over there to get a better look, and I am instantly overcome with panic. There was a footprint in the dirt, and it was huge, like whatever it was giant and heavy. I got up and crouched down next to it to get a better look. I'd never seen anything like this before. It was human-shaped, but it looked like whatever it was had like 6 or 7 long toes. And as I'm kneeling there, just trying to take in what I'm seeing, I feel it again, a large thud, and then another, and I could see in the dirt more footprints forming, as if whatever it was had been standing there the whole time, and now it was walking away and circling back towards me. I didn't think. I just ran. I left my tent. I left everything. I didn't care. I was overcome with this primal fear to just get the hell out of there and get away from whatever this was. But it wasn't going anywhere. As I'm running, I can hear it crashing through the trees behind me, and it was getting closer. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew if I stopped, it would only be a matter of seconds before this thing was on me. It was getting so dark I couldn't see a thing. I could only feel the stinging pain in my face and my arms from running through these branches. Please don't poke my eyes out. Please don't poke my eyes out. I need to be able to see. And out of nowhere, I burst out of the trees into this small clearing. And there in the middle of the clearing was this old rundown cabin. I didn't know if this was an old ranger's cabin. I didn't know if this was occupied or abandoned, if there was law enforcement or squatters in there. I didn't care. I only had a split second to decide what I was gonna do. Do I face the unknown terror of who could possibly be in that cabin, or the very real threat of the thing chasing me through the woods? I chose the cabin, and I managed to get from the tree line to that cabin in what felt like a second. I sprinted to the front door, yanked it open, and threw myself inside, slamming the door behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. And for a moment, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the blood rushing and pulsing through my ears. And I didn't have time to call calm down before I heard it, this low, guttural growl coming from outside the cabin. My blood turned to ice. I didn't know until that moment what the word petrified actually felt like. I couldn't move. I had my back pressed up against the door with all my might trying to keep this thing closed, as if I was going to be able to keep this creature from getting in here. The cabin was dark. The only light was the moon coming in through the grimy windows. And it took a minute, but as my eyes adjusted, I was able to make out an old furniture and a fireplace, a table, and a couple of chairs. There was not much in here, but there was no one here, and from the looks of it, there hadn't been anyone here for a very long time. And then this wave of sadness and disappointment kind of washed over me. There wasn't anybody here. There was nobody here that was going to help me. The growling eventually faded, but it was replaced by something so much worse. The slow, deliberate sound of long, sharp nails dragging along the outside cabin wall. I held my breath, trying to track its movements as it went around the cabin. And as it got closer to the window, I saw this huge, dark, shadowy figure. And it seemed like it was looking in the window, like it was trying to look in the window for me. I got this overwhelming feeling like this thing was trying to make me think that it was human. And even though I couldn't see any features, I knew this thing wasn't human. I knew it for sure. It only stayed at the window for about a minute before it continued dragging its long, what I can only imagine to be razor-sharp claws around the outside walls of the cabin. It almost seemed like this thing knew what it was doing. Like it was familiar with the cabin, and it knew where I was in the cabin. And whatever it was trying to do, it was deliberate. And each time it passed around the cabin, it felt like an eternity. But I didn't dare breathe too loud. I didn't dare move at all. My legs were trembling and they were almost getting weak from the effort of pushing up against this door, but I wasn't about to move. And as it passed by again, I got this scent in the air. It smelled like wet, musty, decaying fur and leaves, but like this underlying odor of sulfur, whatever it was making my stomach turn. And my mind was racing. Why wasn't it coming in? There wasn't even a lock on the door. It was almost like this thing was messing with me. There was no doubt in my mind that if it wanted to get in that cabin, it could. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, this creature lets out this horrible sound. It was almost like part roar, part scream. It was so loud and so close, I could feel it vibrating in my chest. So I clamped my hands over my ears and I squeezed my eyes shut. And when I opened them again, I realized the scratching had stopped. And the woods outside was silent. No growls, no wildlife, no nothing. Just eerie silence. I don't know how long I stood there, but I was so afraid to move until I was sure that it was gone. And it wasn't until I saw the first faint light of dawn come through the window that I stumbled over onto the floor. My legs gave out beneath me. I sat there. I didn't know what to do. And as the sun rose, I began to hear the birds chirping outside again, like nothing had happened. And I cautiously approached the window and looked outside, and there was no sign of the creature. And I looked around the cabin to see if I could find any kind of weapon, because I was leaving, and I wasn't going to leave without a weapon. And there wasn't really anything in the cabin except for the metal poker for the fireplace, which was fine with me, so I walked over there and I grabbed it. And as I was turning away, I glanced up and saw a picture on the mantle. It was an old picture of a park ranger outside this cabin leaning up against a truck. There was something familiar about the ranger, though I couldn't place it. And then it hit me. That was Alan, the old man from the diner. He said he was a retired park ranger. This must have been his cabin. I felt like I was gonna puke. Did he know about this? Was he actually trying to warn me? I mean, he saw my map. He knew where I was gonna be. And I felt angry or betrayed. I wasn't even really sure at this point. And it took me several hours to find somebody that could help me. I finally came across a group of hikers on the trail who were able to call for help. When they got there, I told the park rangers that I had gotten lost. I was just too embarrassed to tell them what really happened. I told them where my camp was, and they drove me back there in one of their side-by-sides. I was wondering how I was going to explain these footprints to them, or how they were going to react seeing them. And when we made it back to camp, I was in total disbelief. There were no footprints, no sign of me losing my shit and running away. The campsite looked totally normal, like nothing had happened. I got out of there and I got on the first flight back home. What was I going to tell everybody? They were going to ask me about this big epic adventure I was on. I never told anybody what happened. And sometimes I still wonder if I just imagined it all. Like, exhaustion and these campfire stories are just playing tricks with my mind. And there are plenty of nights when I lie awake in bed just replaying what happened over and over again. What was it? Did Alan know about it? I don't know if I'll ever be able to let this go. I still hike though, and I'm still very proud of my journey. But now I always go in groups and never overnight. And I will never whistle in the woods again. I thought I was prepared for anything the Smokies could throw at me, but there are things in Appalachia that no trail guide can prepare you for. And when you break the rules, you might just discover why some urban legends are better left in the dark. Because in Appalachia, the greatest danger isn't the wilderness, it's what's waiting for you within it.